Well, I'm so excited to welcome you. So, for those of you joining, today is meant to be an Ask a Specialist live. So, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll be answering them over the next 30 minutes with lactation consultant and audiologist Katia. And so, yeah, what prompted this is a little bit of my background. I'm a primary care nurse practitioner. My research is in the field of the gut microbiome of babies. And what we learned is breast milk is really critical for establishing health for the rest of life. And we know that, and we also know that it's not easy as a modern mom to breastfeed for very long. So we thought this episode would be critical. It's called Disrupting the Flow and what's really happening in the bottle industry right now. So with that, Katia, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, all right, no problem. So I am a speech therapist and lactation consultant. I studied audiology as well. I've got a mix of everything. So I started off doing a dual degree in speech therapy and audiology. And what I didn't know about speech therapy is with that comes, therapy in swallowing, therapy in eating, feeding therapy. So I kind of found my niche, with infant feeding. And right after I finished studying, I was thrust into our, we call it a community service year. It's more of like an internship year in a super rural hospital with no resources whatsoever, and was thrust into the neonatal ICU there. And, I was working with all of these moms and all these babies. And you can know all of the anatomy of swallowing and the function of swallowing, but it doesn't really mean anything if you don't know much about breastfeeding. So I decided to study further in breastfeeding, and I really wanted to spend, my 20s, the beginning part of my career, getting as much exposure as possible. So after that year, I had spent, I had two part-time jobs, one in a state-owned hospital that was catering to one of the biggest townships in South Africa, which is an underserved area, as well as then one of the top private maternity hospitals. And what was crazy in all of these years of my practicing and all these different environments that I've been in is, it doesn't matter if you're a millionaire, if you're in a rural setting, if you're on your fifth child, if you're on your first child, all of these mothers are experiencing the same issues, have the same questions, the same problems. And that is something that has run true even now with my move to Portugal, being, in a European market, exactly the same situation. And I think I've seen so many cases where the entire trajectory of the child's health could have changed if the mother had had the support that she so needed.
Yeah.
The correct support. And unfortunately, there's not as out there. Thank goodness it is starting to boom and picking up, in popularity, the whole area of lactation consulting. But it's a super, super important thing. I love what I do. And usually, it's just a minor change here or there. Mothers have the most amazing instinct. They usually know what to do. It's just having that support and that confidence and having somebody to turn to if you have a question,
Absolutely.
which can make the world of difference.
Absolutely. And I think, how diverse your experience is very fascinating because, for context, um, this is just such a passion of mine personally because we make the first free food in life vaccine. That's breast milk. And there's so much stigma for moms. Obviously, like, you just created this new life. You're trying to do, it doesn't come with a manual. You're trying to do the best thing possible for that baby. And there are some unique modern challenges that come with feeding devices. And so I think that's really what we're here to discuss today. In having observed two different markets, you in South Africa and now in Europe, my research began in the United States. And so I'll talk a little bit about why the US government gave us the same grants that backed NASA to solve this problem for new moms, because it is so critical to be able to provide human milk for the first 6 months of life.
Huge.
I'll just say that bottom line. and then how we deal with that as clinicians, it was really, we need to be able to provide nurses better tools. You go You go into the field because you care about people and you really want to give the next generation the fairest start in life. These vulnerable preterm infants cannot advocate for themselves. And so it was very curious, the data that was coming back, like 92% of women in the US kept reporting, well, when I introduced the standard bottle, I really struggle getting the baby to latch back to breast. And so I really, in my PhD as a student, began to dive into this field of research. Like I loved the mechanism of microbiome because it puts the power back in a family's hands in terms of how you establish like your lifelong health trajectory if you're going
Which
to
is
be
exactly where it should be, you know?
yeah, exactly. If you're going to be really reliant on the medical system or if you're going to create and train a healthy immune system. And I just want to say this and like get your input too from these other markets where you've been working hands-on with moms. So I'm talking from, you know, qualitative research and metadata perspective. They kept saying, yeah, the shape, the feel, the flow, something is different. And then a baby gets used to this bottle and doesn't want to come back to breast. And so that's what I would really like to discuss with you today is when we dove in with some microfluidic engineers and other brilliant scientists in the field really laid the foundation for this work. Basically, what they had done, Dr. Donna Geddes is one, she was looking at babies with ultrasound while they were at breast and being able to really, observe that dynamic. Because as you know, if you're a mom, you know, like your lactation speed, the milk flow speed is different. It's dynamic. But there is a constant, and it's as the baby grows and develops, these oral maxillary muscles create a negative pressure that it actually follows a quite linear trend on averages. It's like growth charts.
Of course.
Like is your
Exactly.
baby
It's exactly the same. Yeah.
Yes. And what
And
was
you know,
shocking was like no one had really studied this over the trajectory of 2 years. And so that's what we've done. But I
and
want you
we're
to
in
first talk about
2024.
yeah.
How? No, but that's, and you know what it is, it's frightening, especially, you know, looking at the research of Britt Pados, for example. For us, as healthcare professionals, this is what happens generally, and especially with the mothers that I've seen. In terms of specifically buying bottles, they fall into one of two categories. Either they're pregnant with their first child and they're creating their registries for their baby showers. And what happens is you go online, and you can even test it yourself. Go online and search in whatever country you're in, and you will see specific brands just all over the place, popping, you know, straight in your eyes. And obviously they'll go for that. They'll buy and they'll expend exorbitant amounts of money on bottles, and bottles that are for, you know, age 0 to 12.
Yeah.
So they've gone and they spent that money already before the baby's even there. Or alternatively, they'll wait until the babies come, they'll breastfeed for a while, and then they might ask their healthcare professional, you know, what is the best bottle to buy for my baby that will not, you know, interfere or interrupt my breastfeeding journey. Now, with that second option, as a healthcare professional, and that's not a slight at healthcare professionals, and it's not for you know, any amount of ignorance. We are just trying to do the best that we can, okay, prior to this data coming out. And naturally, what will happen is you will start recommending certain bottles that you see have the least amount of feeding related incidents.
Yeah.
So it's not a sure thing, because the truth of the matter is all these bottles are advertised as slow flow. But what is slow flow?
What does it mean? What does it mean for my 5-week-old? What does it mean for my 7-month-old? Yes.
And even with that being said, I might be a mother with a super fast flow that my baby is able to tolerate. You might be a mother that has a much slower flow and a baby with a weak suck. So what your slow flow is and my slow flow are two completely different things. So how can you just put it into this massive basket of slow flow with no exact data on it? So sadly, a sad reality is moms will either have spent so much money on buying these bottles that they can't afford to, keep on buying. So they just have to stick with whatever they have, whether it suits their baby or it doesn't, whether it creates, things like reflux, colic, extra gassiness, and massive threats of things like aspiration, which nobody even talks about. But if there's any milk, if the baby can't tolerate it and that milk is going into the lungs, it can cause huge problems later down the line.
Yeah.
So either moms are sort of stuck with that bottle that they have, or if they are able to afford other bottles, they still end up spending a ton of money buying one bottle after another to, trial and error, find the fit for their baby.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about research here, if I could just chat about Britt Pados's research, which is crazy, that the details that came out of that. The range of mils per minute that came out of this research was anywhere from 1.6 mils a minute to 85 mils per minute.
Let's talk about that, because when I hear numbers, it's really hard to conceptualize what that means. Basically, that's like taking the tiniest of humans in the most vulnerable state in their life, whoever's flowing at 85 milliliters a minute, and fire hosing them, and then expecting them to be able to swallow that. And
100%. If I could put that into context for you. A normal baby, okay, their mil range, the typical developing baby, depending on what age they are, could be eating 80 mils per feed, or maybe if they're on the bigger side, 160 mils per feed. Okay.
What age are you talking about?
This could be anywhere from around 4 weeks to about 6 months or so, anywhere in that range. So if we were to say, and this is I'm just using a very broad average here, each baby has their own feeding time.
Yeah.
Generally, babies could spend, about plus minus 20 minutes on the breast. If we had to take that 85 ml bottle that we're talking about, that slow flow, that would equate to, if it was on a 20-minute thing, 1.7 liters of milk in 20 minutes. No adult could even take that. Almost 2 liters of milk in a 20 minutes.
2 liters of Coke.
Exactly. So
in 20 minutes.
In 20 minutes, which would be like, each baby is different, but 20 minutes, a lot of the averages of babies will fall into that category.
And the difference is, as an adult, you have autonomy over pushing this away if you can't swallow it fast enough. The challenge is when you have a baby and you're putting this,
they're just learning the skill, and you are completely fire hydranting them.
Yeah.
Alternatively, if we have to take it back to what that means in real time, is if these babies that range from 80 to 160 mils, if they had to start their feed, they would finish, that baby who's eating 80 mils per feed would finish that feed in 1 minute. And that baby who's a bit bigger, that might be taking 160 mils, will finish that feed in 2 minutes.
Katia,
I know, this is what I'm saying. Like, if I had to give you a plate of food, it would be like competitive eating, basically.
Yeah. This is absolutely shocking. So just to, put that into context in terms of, like, now what does that mean for baby? What does that mean for mom? And what does that mean for us as the healthcare providers that are in slightly different professions? So for baby, your children. That's what we mean by aspiration. And there was, and this entire episode is not to instill fear.
No.
It's just so important to know the flow. And that's where I'm really passionate about your work, Katia, is you're basically taking what's in the archives of literature and making sure that people see it.
Yes.
And the most importantly, new moms see it. And so that they can be informed on how to listen to the cues of their body, listen to the cues of their baby, develop confidence with this stepwise cue-based feeding. So, but quantitatively exactly how that milk is flowing inside his mouth. Because what's happening for baby is no wonder what we saw with the government grant that we got. We studied over 300 babies. It ended up being a little under 300 because there were actually some fatalities in this study, and they were looking at standard bottles that are being used in hospitals. We won't even name the hospital. And we were only looking at feeding related events specifically related to flow. If that baby was getting breastfed, if they had an NG tube, they wouldn't have appeared in the study. 1 in 4 infants were basically choking. What that means is the heart rate would slow, they would have cessation of bradycardia, is what they call that, apnea, a cessation of actually breathing. And why I think it's so important to share this information is because no nurse wants to be left holding a bottle that is providing a faulty flow. No doctor wants to be left providing, a brand new life that they're trying to save, something that could compromise that. And no one wants to walk in and tell the mom, sorry, your baby is feeding, you're having these issues with feeding, now they're staying twice as long.
Of course.
If it doesn't cause damage to the brain and let alone fatality. So it's so important to be really, really clear about why flow is so important in the most vulnerable of the population. And then as the baby gets older, they can turn away more, the oromaxillary muscles are developing. What that means for baby is if they're getting something that is not data driven and appropriate for their age, you're gonna have more spit up, of course. If we sat here and chugged 2 liters of Pepsi,
it would happen to you as well. Of course. Yeah. And this is the thing. I think I am not of the opinion that I need to fearmonger. I'm not here to instill fear. I think just knowledge is power. These things are preventable, right? They are very easily preventable.
Yeah.
If you don't know about it and you're just, I think we're here to spread information, especially for new parents. If you don't know about it and you're standing in front of an aisle of 100 different brands in front of you,
and they all
you
say
need
the same thing.
They all say slow flow.
But the data from internal and external testing that's published says differently. And that's what we're here to share.
Exactly. And I think, in reality, what this means for babies, and when you said no one wants to be that nurse that's, holding a struggling baby, I have been there thousands of times as a speech therapist. My entire job is to help these little ones learn how to feed. And once they have progressed past either syringe feeding or cup feeding, and it's time to move on to the bottle, it's scary. It's scary because you don't know what's happening with the flow of the bottle. You don't know what's going to happen with this little one. And the reality of the situation is, especially in your prem sort of populations, the risk of aspiration, which is choking. So we have, if I could say, for anybody who doesn't know who's watching, sort of 2 pipes in our throat. One goes to our stomach and one goes to our lungs.
Yep.
Babies haven't, they have the sucking reflex, but it takes a while to train to get, that suck, swallow, breathe cycle, down. It takes a while, especially if they're prem, they might be a little bit behind on that.
Yeah.
When you're introducing a bottle with slow flow, who knows what flow, they are at much higher risk of choking because they don't have control over that yet. That milk might enter into their lungs. That is called aspiration. And if they're small enough, sometimes they don't have a productive enough cough to cough it out. So if there's milk sitting in the lungs for prolonged periods of time, that can cause things like pneumonia and all of that. But that's more in a hospital setting. So
yeah,
in terms of like moms now going home and having to feed or going back to work and having to introduce a bottle, the side effects of introducing a bottle that's not really catered to your flow and your baby's abilities to feed could be things like, obviously if it's too fast, also choking at the bottle. If you're noticing they're coughing a lot, they're spitting up a lot. If the flow is too fast and it's sort of coming at them, it would be like me filling an entire bucket of water and holding it at your face tilted the whole time, and you just have to keep on, chugging it. Of course, if we have a stomach full of liquid and then you lie the baby down again, it will come back up again, and that you can kickstart things like reflux.
Yeah.
If the flow is too strong, they tend to fuss at the bottle, they might pull away. Air is coming in because they're gulping to try and keep up with it. Air is coming in as well, so a lot more gas, a lot more colic, a lot more uncomfortable babies. And I think So often I've seen such an adverse reaction to bottles after they've had it for a while because of the fact that every time they go into the bottle, they're like, it's adrenaline situation. I'm like,
Am I
eat
gonna
this now.
live?
Yeah,
Am I gonna live
like it's like a survival thing. Like, okay, got to get myself psyched up for this. My tummy will be full after this, but it's going to be a rough ride to get there. So, the reality is that like, and I used to, if I have any of my previous colleagues from South Africa watching this, we used to laugh because it actually got to a point where we had almost like a little bit of a betting pool. We would have mothers coming in with the exact same reports. It would always be, I think my baby's got reflux. They're vomiting a lot.
Yeah.
They won't take my breast anymore. They just scream at the bottle. Their weight is a little bit, it's, kind of plateauing. And, as a healthcare professional, that opens up a million doors of questions that you want to ask. But we eventually just started asking, what bottle are you using? And
Yeah.
95% of the time, the exact same brand bottle kept on coming up. And it's one of the biggest ones in any country, the biggest ones that you see straight away when you're shopping around for bottles. And, making minor changes to feeding, changing the bottle, changing the way that we do things makes it so much more comfortable for mom and specifically for baby. I mean, we want feeding to be a pleasant experience, but especially for moms that are trying this trial and error of like they're trying to find the right bottle, they're doing the best that they can, shopping around to the next bottle, next bottle, next bottle.
And
That feeding experience for the baby is very confusing.
it's confusing for baby. I want to like put people in mom's shoes and also in a passenger's shoes. Like you hear a screaming baby on a plane, and this is I hope this sticks with people who are watching. And I want you to think about, wow, do they know the flow? Because this is such a terrifying time. Like you are trying to nourish new life. And also it's a high pressure environment because you have a baby screaming at you, and the only way that they know how to communicate, and you're trying to trial and error what's going on with this new human. And our job as healthcare providers is to try to take the most recent literature, and now I am so grateful for the work that you talked about from Dr. Pados and the work that's been done with Dr. Geddes. And now it's really time to spread that information as much as possible, because what we observed is you are unique. Your feeding experience is unique, but there are also very interesting norms in linear trends. And so what I want to show you really quickly is, in working with microfluidic engineers and experts who took the data that was available from that ultrasound that we said that Geddes did and looked at the oromaxillary vacuum. That basically means how strong is the baby's mouth at a given age, and how much can they pull? How much negative pressure can they create? And so with that limited data that we had that was very focused on preterm babies, let me look and reference it. I was actually up to 3-month-old babies as well. You can see that as they grow, that of course that negative pressure is going to start to grow. And so for preterm, we knew what that negative pressure was. And that's how we knew from Dr. Pados's work, ideally these infants are going to get milk at 2.2 milliliters a minute. So I just want to drill this in. 2.2 milliliters a minute compared to 85 is what that little infant can tolerate. And then what we were able to create is a model all the way up to 2 years of age. And it looks like this. It looks like this. So you have the preterm infant, 2.2, what they need, all the way up. This is actually 12 months. And what's beautiful about this is if you know that repeatedly from a product, you are going to be getting this target flow that is based on an age range for your baby, no more arbitrary slow, medium, fast. 3 to 6 months is a huge window. At least you know the specific flow rate that you're going to get. And I'm really encouraged. I actually was just talking to some scientists in the field, and it really does seem like other manufacturers of these products are starting to step up the industry standards. But what is so critical is that we share this non-biased testing that's being done by researchers, not just the internal testing that's being done in the company. And I say that having started the natural
Yeah.
nipple, because it's really my mission is just to put these tools into nurses' hands, into doctors' hands, into lactation consultants' hands that make them confident that they're doing the best possible thing for that child and help empower the mother. Because like you said, there is an innate wisdom that comes with being able to listen to your baby's cues. And we have, you know, you're doing an amazing job with the blogs that you've written to help moms understand, okay, my baby's a little above the average percentile
Yes.
here, and it's time to advance to the next flow. Because also what can happen when we talk about a comfortable feeding experience is your baby might be super strong and might
Which
not have
happens.
any oral maxillary, so oral mouth maxillary, the muscle around the mouth, kind of deformation or issue. And they might need to advance because if they're starting to get like really impatient, they're starting to tire. You can kind of talk about what those, as the
What that looks
provider
like.
that's touching the baby right then, what does that look like for
Yes.
mom if they need to advance to the
And
next flow?
that's a huge thing, you know, also, which I didn't even touch on with the bottles, but besides the safety and the flow, what is super important about bottle feeding, on feeding in general, specifically on the breast, is we're very lucky babies are born with fatty sort of buccal pads to help them create that suction, right? However, you know, the orofacial musculature development is no different to that of, you know, you always hear about you have to do tummy time with your babies because it helps develop their truncal control, their core, their back, their neck. We have to help them along, and it's no different with the muscles of the mouth, right? Which is why breastfeeding is the best, because it is quite a workout for them. They have to really suck to get that out. But that jaw motion that's happening, that tongue motion that's happening, all helps develop these muscles in the mouth that is super important later on for feeding and eating, and feeding and speaking, sorry. So, you know, I think what happens with these fast flow bottles is sometimes you can even check with a bottle. You'll put milk in, milk or water in, you turn it around, it will start dripping straight away. They don't have to do any work for any of that. So it's not really aiding that in the mouth. Now, each baby is different. I have seen 32-week preemies that have a stronger suck than, you know, a 42-weeker. Every single baby is different, and there are so many variables involved with feeding in terms of like how much milk is mom making, how many letdowns is she having in a feed, how strong is the baby suck, are they able to create that negative pressure in the mouth. So because there are so many variables, you can't just, like you said, put them in a small, medium, and, you know, fast flow rate. It's way too specific. So data like this is so important. It is vital for us to understand. Like, healthcare professionals understand that, but right now all we have to work with is, you know, slow, fast, and medium, or medium and fast. So it's vital
And I
for
want to
us.
preface too, you're in a high acuity environment with alarms going off, and you don't have much agency around what the hospital has chosen.
Yeah,
And
you have
so
to work with what
it's
they're
not
doing.
your fault. It's just a matter of like my mission is bringing this data to as many healthcare providers as possible. And I cut you off,
No,
but
no, no, not at all.
I'm so passionate about this because like it's so interesting. Your work is so hands-on with the mom and with the baby, with other healthcare providers in the high acuity setting. So I was super curious when we got this data from the National Science Foundation back. I'm like, okay, 92% of moms going back to work is around 3 months in the US, if you're lucky, are giving up on that breastfeeding journey because it is so incredibly painful to try to get the baby to latch when they come home. Either the baby's screaming or they're literally biting because they're not used to getting the milk as slow from
Yes,
the breast.
of
It's different
course,
and they're
of
impatient
course.
if they're tolerating and if they're
Yeah,
swallowing, if that makes sense.
Of course.
But what was so fascinating, Katia, is the world's most successful country at supporting families to get 6 months of breast milk minimum and ideally 2 years. And the president of their breastfeeding initiative is a medical doctor that reports all of this data to the World Health Organization. I'm like, I'm going to go to Nepal, right? This is like 2019, and I quit my clinical job, and I'm like so excited
They're
about
gonna
what we're
show us
building.
the way.
He and I had the most interesting, and you can even find this if you go back through our Instagram lives 2019, and I'll post some videos later. For 3 hours, we chatted, and he literally has been gatekeeper of what products come into hospitals. Now, nutrition companies often give free nipples to hospitals if they buy their formula. And I want to specify that there is a time and a place for needing to supplement and knowing that your baby is going to have nutrition if something happens to you, if you're separated from them, if you get infection, is necessary. But this is an incredibly reactive market where he fought a massive nutrition company that literally what his solution was, because the bottom nipples were flowing so unnaturally like breast, is the nurses have this tiny spoon. It's so interesting, has a different name. They drip pump milk into this tiny spoon, and they drop by drop make sure that little infant's getting it at less than 2.2 milliliters a minute. Now, tell me how that's possible in the West where we don't have. And that was our conclusion.
Can we clone this man, please? Can we clone this man? We need more of him. We definitely need more.
Yeah.
Of him.
So interesting because he's like, in his late 50s, early 60s, and has all of this expertise. And at the end, he was like, yeah, we need safer, consistently predictable flowing products. And so I want to talk to any of the expecting dads who might be watching, because surprisingly, they have been really interested in the fact that, like, wow, you guys got the same grants that back NASA, like the government funded this. Like, what's the problem with, I don't know, I don't have a nipple that produces milk. Like, what can I do around this? And so it's been really, really rewarding. I just want to give context because we're running a little bit over, to create an infant feeding system that is based on these data-driven flows of how the baby grows and how lactation adapts to the baby's needs has been so enriching in my life, to see dads be like, wow, now I have agency. I can actually help feed the baby spitting up less. They're crying less when I'm giving them a bottle with pumped milk. And I just wanted to show, and guys, this is not affiliated with Katia. She's here to tell you the data. It's really like an understated technology. So it looks like a little rocket ship funded by grants that get rocket ships, but the unique aspects of this are from 3D scanning actively lactating breast. This might be terrifying for someone that's never seen an actively lactating breast, but it can change. The nipple can really change. So moms are actually able to input their breast geometry, get paired with a shape that's most like them. But what's really novel is we've designed these ducts that help eliminate colic, 66% less, according to the market who had tried other bottles first and then switched to the natural nipple. And you're like, okay, cool. It looks cute. We're going to get some glass spaces as well. They are also food grade silicone, so the concern of microplastics. The only plastic here is the rim.
Amazing.
The tiny hole is what took us 4.5 years to figure out a post-production technology to consistently at scale produce these quality controlled results. The breast is a highly sophisticated piece of evolutionary equipment.
It's so crazy. It is crazy what it can do.
I didn't know what I was getting into. These poor engineers.
Me too. Me too. Don't worry. I was like, oh, it's just a breast. I mean, come on, how bad could it be? I had no idea.
Yeah.
No idea.
Well, I'm so grateful for your time. I know we ran a little over, Katia, and
It's okay. I feel like there's
one thing I
just,
did want
yeah,
to touch on was so that you were talking about the baby needing to have some resistance in order to develop their muscles
yeah,
in their face.
yes,
Um, if you guys have read Breathe by James Nestor, he talks about the need now for basically orthodontics is so different um, after the advent of bottles because our palate isn't actually spreading to be able to intake more oxygen as adults. So this is why it's super critical to have that orifice
yeah,
much more wide
yeah,
like breast
yeah.
and have the flow challenge the baby as much as breast would. Um, the other thing that was really interesting going back to the microbiome data and why it's our mission to support the continuity. If you have to be away from baby, if a caregiver in the hospital needs to feed, you're going to struggle 83% less getting that baby back to breast and getting a latch,
It's
is
amazing.
because we nearly eradicated this really critical little microbe called B. infantis, directly correlated in the 1960s with the rise of formula marketing. And I say that because we are 90% microbial DNA and 10% human DNA. Like we have a symbiotic, commensal relationship with some of these important microbes that help us synthesize nutrients that are required to make blood cells. So
Wow.
I say that to put into perspective how important this episode is, because greenwashing or milk washing products to desperate parents is dangerous. And that's where I'll leave it.
It's huge. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we just scratched the surface of what there actually is to speak about here. But I just think, fundamentally, feeding a baby is the most important thing that you can do. It needs to be safe and it needs to be specific to that child. Having all of these massive brands with these crazy marketing schemes that are honestly really catchy. Like I even sometimes I'm like, oh really, is that true? And then when I actually go look into it, I'm like, okay. But as a first-time parent or even fourth-time parent, you're just doing the best you can with what is given to you. Even as a healthcare provider working in a hospital, if they use this specific product, you have to make it work. However, I do want to believe that we're in 2024. We have the most amazing research at our hands. Why are we not using it? And it's exciting to see research like this come out to help give perspective to parents on and healthcare providers alike on exactly how important flow is and how important it is to be consistent with flow in order to give your baby the best shot at safe feeding, oral development, all of these things that they need, and for most importantly, to keep them on the breast for as long as possible until you or your baby are ready, not because you are forced out of this traumatic experience of trying 50 different bottles.
Yeah.
And
costly experience at the cost of your wallet, at the cost of your
time.
peace of mind and your sleep and your baby's well-being and
Yeah.
health. And so I
So,
just want to offer to parents, if you are, confused about how your bottle is flowing, we have third-party testing that we do with engineers to maintain quality control in Florida. So I want to open up, like, if you really want to know about the flow of your current bottle, once a quarter, we'll welcome testing along with our quality control testing. So you can actually get feedback on how your bottle is flowing. Or if you just want to get the natural nipple and know exactly how fast that milk is coming out, we really take pride in being able to help parents through an array of other feeding issues. So you're going to get support. If you go to thenaturalnipple.com, basically we have programmed an AI nurse here. And why I say that is
so
Dr.
exciting.
Google.
Oh,
Dr.
Dr.
Google
Google.
has a lot of noise with SEO, and so we want to make sure you're getting to, if it's the middle of the night and it's 5 a.m. and your baby's screaming, you're like, do I go to the hospital with this issue, or is this something I can handle myself here at home? And there's a different position. You can chat with her, and you can also get paired with lactation consultants, infant feeding specialists, I also do like primary care and microbiome health coaching as well. So you're really getting this comprehensive tool as well as the clinical support that you need. And
A one-stop shop.
yes,
Whatever you
we're,
need.
we're just excited to see parents be supported because, you know, our body has evolved to be able to do this. I love talking about how the microbiome and really establishing it in that first 1,000 days of life with the most critical ingredient being breast milk. It's like, how do we just make that easier for all clinicians and all parents?
Of
And so,
course. And this is how I think we've come full circle. In the beginning, I was saying, so many times I've seen situations where parents were forced to, because of circumstances or bottles, move away from breast milk, and how that changed the entire trajectory of that child's health because of the microbiome, because of everything that they could have gotten from that breast milk that could have been avoided if they had had the support. And,
absolutely.
I feel like it's so exciting that we're finally getting to a point where we're making support so much more accessible. We're getting to a point where we're getting data that is exactly what we need to be able to move forward and get the right information to help these parents, help these babies, and just try and keep breastfeeding going for as long as possible. In a world that's seemingly trying to give you 100 reasons not to, we will try to be the gatekeepers of that.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, after like seeing what moms go through, listening to hundreds of moms, I'm like, oh, this safer solution needs to exist. Selfishly, like I need sleep
Yeah,
before I have
exactly.
kids. I need to know they're not spitting up. So it's
Of
really
course.
just such a pleasure to have your expertise here. Thank you so much for your
Amazing.
time,
The pleasure
Katia.
is mine. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's been wonderful. And I
Yes.
see we've got a question for a link to the article, which I'll send, or you can send a little bit later. We'll organize to send that through. And yeah,
Yeah,
again, thank you for today. It's been wonderful.
absolutely. And guys, thenaturalnipple.com, we're going to push this out as a blog, a podcast. You're going to find it on Instagram and the Reels. But if you go to thenaturalnipple.com, just sign up for our newsletter so you know when you can get Katia's juicy information as well as flow facts coming to your inbox.